if not all of you, at one point, if not right now, are experiencing a relationship in the workplace that feels a bit tricky. And that will be tricky on the spectrum. So from mild irritation when you're in the meeting room with them to deep anxiety at the very mention of their name. And actually, we do work with some people who are in that place. This can be a line manager, a peer, stakeholder, someone in your team, or even a customer. So what we're going to talk to you about today is relationship resilience. And what is relationship resilience? So relationship resilience, the ability or capacity to recover quickly from difficulties in relationships, the ability to adapt to adversity in relationships. So that could be a number of situations at work. When you think about tricky relationships, things that feel difficult. It might be that you work remotely, so you don't feel very connected, you don't feel part of the team. It could be that you are leading a team where you're clashing with some of the people in your team. It could be that you don't get on with your line manager at all. It might be that you've just had to have a performance conversation with somebody and they didn't receive the news very well, and that felt tricky. There are a variety of situations and reasons why the situation in your relationship might feel difficult. When we have relationship resilience, it doesn't mean in the moment it feels any less difficult. What it does mean is that you can bounce back from it. So if you have that difficult conversation with somebody and they walk away in tears or angry, when you don't have any relationship resilience, you are likely to beat yourself up, potentially. I didn't get it right, they might not like me anymore, I did it wrong. With relationship resilience, you might still have a feeling of not feeling that great, but you will bounce back from it much quicker. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover why relationships matter to all of us, why it's hard when we don't have the relationships that we need in the workplace, why some relationships feel more difficult than others, and we're going to share with you some strategies that can help you improve your relationship resilience if you choose to take them on. And just to set expectations, some of the content of this presentation we run and we use in our programs that we work with our clients over a 6 to 9 month period, so we go really deep. So this is just a taster, and we hope it will provoke some of your thinking, but it might not solve all of your problems. But we will be around later if you want to chat to us a little bit more. So back to Joe and I. Joe and I have been running the business for nearly 6 years now, and we irritate each other massively, most of the time. But on a serious note, these irritations do often lead to heated debates, difficult conversations on a regular basis. Now, the reason we are able to have these difficult conversations and heated debates is because we have a great connection. We really get on. Even though we irritate each other, we really get on. We feel very connected. So that means because we're connected, we feel very safe. And when you feel safe, you feel able to engage in those conversations that are tricky and have those heated debates. The more often you do that, your relationship resilience starts to increase. So the reason we have a very resilient relationship is because we have a connection. And Joe's going to talk to you now about why having a connection is so important to all of us.
So Lou's talked about the connection in our relationship and how that allows us to have the conversations that really matter so that we can bounce back from those difficult times, those tough situations. I just want to sort of take a few steps back and look at connection in isolation and why that's really important. Matthew Lieberman is an American researcher. He's got a PhD in, I think, a number of things. And he says that our need to connect socially, so to have social connection, is as important as some of our basic needs like food, water, and shelter. So if I was to take food, water, and shelter away from any of you for a long period of time, I'm sure that you'd agree it would absolutely threaten your survival. How many of you, though, would sign up to the notion that if I was to take social connection away from you, that would also have the same impact? So there are a number, there are hundreds of pieces of research that substantiate the claims, really. And I'm just going to talk to you about a few of them. The first one is quite a gruesome one, and we don't sort of condone the experiments, but back in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, there were Harry Harlow carried out some experiments you may be aware of on monkeys. And whilst I'm not suggesting there are any monkeys in the audience today, what he did was he took the baby monkeys away from their mothers. And with some of them, he gave them a replacement mother made out of wire and wood. And with others, and they were put into metal boxes. And within just days of isolation with no social connection at all, the monkeys showed signs of going insane. Now, some of these monkeys were left there for very long periods of time, which would have been very, very distressing. And what happened when they brought them back into a community of monkeys, they were so traumatized that they found it really difficult to connect. They just didn't know how to engage. And then what they did was, with some of the female monkeys, they impregnated them. And when their babies were born, they didn't know how to connect with their own offspring. And what would happen was that they would attack them and in some cases even kill them. So they hadn't learned how to do it. But even those that hadn't had offspring, when they were brought back into a community, they were found pulling at their hair, scratching themselves, self-harming, and some of them were so shocked and depressed because of the withdrawal from connection to the outside world that they actually starved themselves to death. If you then move to humans, many of you, again, might be familiar with some of the stories that came out of the Romanian orphanages, so where children were not given adequate emotional connection within these orphanages, where they were just left in cots. When they measured their levels of the stress hormone cortisol and compared it to those that had been raised by parents, even years later, the levels of the stress hormone cortisol were far superior to the children that had been raised by parents and had had enough social connection. And any of you that have an interest in psychology may be aware of Bowlby's infamous research on attachment theory, where he looked at how we are hardwired really to connect with others and attach to somebody, normally our mother or our primary caregiver, in order to survive. So when we're babies, we attach to somebody, whether it's a nanny, the mother, the father, whoever, and we cry to get attention so that they will come to us and feed us. And so his research on attachment theory shows that we come into the world pre-programmed to connect. So if you just take those three examples around connection and the impact of its absence, it's easy to see that whilst basic needs on the bottom, food, shelter, water, come lower than social needs around our connection, it's easy to see why Lieberman changed it round and said, actually, our social needs are more important and they are the foundation. So if we are to build resilience within ourselves around relationships, social needs, social connection is the foundation. So we're hardwired to connect. Brené Brown, you may have seen one of her talks on TED, if any of you watch the TED Talks. If you haven't, I would highly recommend it. It's very powerful. And she said, we are psychologically, emotionally, cognitively and spiritually hardwired for connection, love and belonging. Connection, along with love and belonging, which is an expression of connection, is why we are here. And it's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Now, whilst connection in the workplace, and we've heard some about this morning, how important that is in terms of relationships, and belonging to a team, to a function, to a community, the love part of it is about that kind of feedback. So we're hardwired to connect, and we think this really articulates beautifully why that's so important.
Okay, so Joe's talked about the importance of connection and how that starts to help to build our relationship resilience. When we don't have connection, as I alluded to at the beginning, it feels really uncomfortable, from mild irritation to deep anxiety. And I'm sure you can all remember, and if you can't remember, if you've got children yourself now or other people's children, when you're in the playground and you really want to play with somebody and they don't want to play with you, it happened to me quite a lot. I think I was a bit too excitable. And they don't want to play with you, it really hurts. You feel completely wounded. And as a small child, it's okay to express that by bursting into tears or having a tantrum. The interesting thing is that those feelings of feeling wounded and hurt when we are rejected still exist in the workplace. But bursting into tears and having a tantrum aren't quite so widely accepted in the workplace, but we still feel exactly the same. This is what we call social pain. And research has shown the distress of social pain, rejection, isolation, loss, is biologically identical to the distress of physical pain. The difference is, with physical pain, we can usually see it. So I've broken my leg, I've cut myself. In a small child, you can see the evidence of social pain because they usually will react in a way that will make it evident. With grown-ups, we don't often show it, especially if we've been brought up to not show our feelings. What is really fascinating, the research has shown that the area in the brain, the anterior cingulate, is exactly the same part of the brain that lights up when we are in physical pain as when we are in social pain. And there's loads of stories in the press of elderly couples who have been married for years and then one dies and then the other one dies really soon after. I mean, that is really dying of a broken heart. If you think about this, loss, social pain, extreme. So if I was to fall over now, which wouldn't be unusual, I'm a bit clumsy, and break my leg, it would be very obvious. It is unlikely you would say to me, Lou, get a grip of yourself, man up, get over it, stop making a fuss, try and be professional, please. If you did, you're lacking a lot of compassion. It's very unlikely that you would. Yet the number of times when people express discomfort from a social pain perspective around not connecting with somebody at work, not feeling listened to, not being able to influence, they're exactly the kind of things you might say to somebody. And we hear it all of the time. So with that in mind, how many people are in pain at work right now? Lots. And if any of you have ever experienced any chronic physical pain, you'll know how exhausting that is. Now, I get a bit of sciatica now and then, no big drama, but when I do get it, I'm knackered at the end of the day. You know, my back is hurting, my leg, and everything is an effort. We spend so much time at work. If we are suffering with social pain, and we're going into work every day and feeling that social pain, how exhausting is that? This is why social pain contributes to stress at work. And if you look at any research anywhere around the reasons for stress at work, you will see that there is a reference to social pain in every single piece. And stress at work will, as we know, contributes to absenteeism and also presenteeism. So presenteeism is where I am at work, I'm completely disengaged, my morale is low, I'm not performing. That contributes to that as well. So we're just going to show you 4 bits of research, high level, just to articulate that. So the first piece, these were the areas that were identified. So clearly, inadequate support from my team and unacceptable behaviours, so I feel bullied, absolutely indicate a level of social pain. You could also, not having a say, if I don't feel like I'm able to speak my mind, that would also indicate some social pain. Next piece of research, management style of a boss. In the work that we do, this comes up time and time and time again. And people are too afraid to have a conversation about it because they might then get rejected again, just adding to that social pain. And actually, think about restructuring in the workplace. When there's a restructure, not only might we lose our job potentially or get moved somewhere else, we might lose people that we're close to in the business. Again, loss, social pain. Work relationships, again, came up. And the last piece of research, lack of any understanding leadership, very similar to the management style of a boss. But again here, unable to exert any control or influence, again, that is a form of social pain, especially if a need to influence is really important to me and I don't feel like I can. As is no recognition. If I have a need for recognition and I don't get given that, I'm going to feel disconnected. So again, social pain. It comes up everywhere. So where have we got to so far?
So we're hardwired to connect. We need connection. This isn't a preference that people have in the workplace or in life. This is a need that we have to survive and, more importantly, thrive in the workplace. We experience emotional pain in the same way that we experience physical pain. So when we are excluded, we're rejected, or we experience loss in the workplace, the same part of our brain that lights up when we break our leg also lights up when we experience social pain. Real relationship challenges are consistently cited as one of the key contributors to work-related stress. So something does need to change. So it's important that we can all start to value building our relationship resilience and help others, as well as ourselves, to start to work the resilience muscle. Because resilience comes from facing into adversity and difficult times. It's not about avoiding them. And finally, we need to think about social pain will always be there. It's here to stay. So the bad news is it's here to stay. The good news is that we can start to do something about it if we are prepared to value and invest in building our resilience and helping those around us build theirs too. So how do we do that? Maybe a question on your mind right now, because it all sounds relatively straightforward. We need connection. Okay, we've got to get more resilient. Fine. It really starts with ourselves, and that's the hard pill that, to swallow, because wouldn't it be great if we could just wave a magic wand and put everyone through a conveyor belt of go on this workshop or take this pill or do whatever? But it's not as simple as that. First of all, we have to start within ourselves, and we have to look at ourselves hard in the mirror and find out what's going on for us. So we have to take some personal responsibility. What often happens is when we've gone through the restructure or the redundancy consultation process, or we've worked with a team that was really tough, or we've worked for a line manager that doesn't behave in a particularly supportive way, we tend to blame the stuff out of there. So we hold everyone in the outer world, or everything in the outer world, accountable for the pain that we're experiencing. Okay? And what we need to do to become more resilient is become our own social pain doctor. Okay? And in the words of the American author Neil Walsh, he said, unless you are prepared to go within, you will go without. So we need to prepare ourselves to go within and take a good look at ourselves in the mirror to find out how we can start to build emotional resilience for ourselves.
Okay, so for us, this always starts with self-awareness. All of the work that we do as a business holds self-awareness as the most important factor. Because in our experience and in our view, those who are the most self-aware have the most opportunity to be the most successful and have the most positive impact and influence possible. And we work with 5 levels of self-awareness. Well, we work with 2 of the 5, but we have a view there are 5 levels of self-awareness. So the first one is none. And I'm sure most of you have worked with somebody at some time in your career who has no self-awareness whatsoever. How is that? It's great fun, isn't it? Have no idea of the impact they have, take no responsibility for their contribution to anything. It is everybody else's problem. Not pleasant to be around. Level 2 is, so I'm aware of my behaviour, but full stop. So for example, I know that I have a tendency, when I'm excited, passionate, or a bit nervous, to speed up. Okay. So I'm aware of that, but that's it. That would be just level 2. I am aware of that, full stop. Level 3 is, I'm aware of that, and I'm also aware of the impact that can have. So I know I can lose people, or they can feel railroaded, it can feel quite forceful. And that's very useful, but it's not at all useful in terms of changing until you get to level 4, which is I'm aware of my behaviour, I know the impact it has, and I care about the impact it has. Because unless I care about the impact, I'm not going to change it. And we work with lots of people who go, yeah, I'm self-aware, me, got loads of self-awareness. Yeah, I know I'm a bit dominant, and I know, I put people off speaking up in meetings. Just need to get over it. They need to man up. They need to be professional. That kind of. So, but they don't care about it. But they would say, yeah, I'm self-aware. Unless you get to this part, I care about the impact I have, you're not going to change. Where we like to take people we work with is to level 5, which is a desire to explore why you behave like that. So I know from a lot of the work that I've done, one of the reasons I have a tendency to speed up is because I'm very uncomfortable feeling vulnerable. I mean, who isn't? So as soon as I feel a bit vulnerable, I just speed it up to kind of... So the work I've done is around that. What is so scary to me about being vulnerable? That is when you get a real shift. So they're the 5 levels. You need to be at least to number 4 before you're going to make any change. Okay. So emotional intelligence, EQ, emotional quotient, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's been knocking around now for about 30 years. I would say the last 10, 15 is when it's become very prevalent and important. So yes, you absolutely need IQ, you need intellect. But if you don't have emotional intelligence as well, then you're not going to be as successful as you could be. And the emotional intelligence piece completely feeds into self-awareness. So emotional intelligence means the ability to perceive, understand, and manage emotions in yourself and in other people. That's the key thing here. So the model I'm going to show you here, this basic EQ model, holds self-awareness. That's the first piece. Unless you are self-aware and can recognize and manage your own emotions, you haven't got a chance in hell of doing it with anybody else. You've got to start with yourself. Once you have self-awareness, your awareness of others will start to improve. So once you recognize what your own triggers are, and you recognize that you've got your own issues going on, you will start to recognize, okay, well, if I've got that going on, then so must other people. So I'm starting to consider what might be going on for the other person or people. When I have self-awareness, I'm much more able to self-manage as well. When I recognize why I feel like I do, I'm able to manage it in the moment. I might still feel the same, but because I'm aware of what it's about, I'm able to manage it. So the way that I show up will feel different. And if I'm aware of other people, and I'm able to manage myself and my emotions, my relationships are going to be so much better. So let's put that into an example. Let's imagine, I'm sure none of you experience this, that there is someone you need to influence in the organisation and you're just struggling with it. Okay. Someone who is key to you delivering on your project, piece of work, whatever it might be, or is someone that could impact your career progression, one of those. So you're not managing to do it right now, and you have no self-awareness. So what you'd probably do from a place of no self-awareness is start to say, well, it's Jo's, she's just this, it's her fault, why can't she be influenced, she's got an issue, she's hard work, it's all about Jo. I take no responsibility for my part in the fact I can't influence her. It's all about Jo. So in terms of awareness of others, I couldn't care less. I mean, I've got no consideration about what's going on for Jo because I've got no self-awareness myself. Self-management, I don't recognise I've got anything to self-manage. So the way that I show up when I'm around her, someone like me, my pattern would be to be very irritated that I can't influence her, and I leak it. I've got great leakage, you can tell when I'm irritated. So I'm not self-aware. So when I'm around Jo, she will feel my irritation. So it's no wonder our relationship isn't great. If she can feel that from me, it's very unlikely I'm going to be able to influence her. However, when I start to build my self-awareness, so I've gone, level 2, level 3, level 4, what I'll start to recognise is, I wonder what it is that I've got going on that stops me connecting and influencing Jo. What part of this is my stuff? What is stopping me? How am I self-sabotaging? When I start doing that, I'm then going to start having more awareness of Jo and start asking myself the question, so I wonder how she experiences me. I wonder what might be going on for her when she's around me. And then I'm going to be able to self-manage. So I'm going to recognize these feelings of defensiveness and irritation, know that it's my stuff, it's actually not her, so I will be able to manage it because I'm aware of it. So the way that she then experiences me will be different, and our relationship will improve. Self-awareness, what are you going to make some...
I was just thank God for that.
So self-awareness basically gives us the choice to be flexible. So let's use a metaphor of a piece of bamboo. A piece of bamboo in a storm will just sway because it is flexible. If it was rigid and it was in a high storm, it would snap because it's got no flexibility. So how many of us are truly bamboo-like, and how many of us are totally rigid and are snapping all over the place in terms of emotionally feeling quite fragile, social pain, snapping. So how do we become more bamboo-like? How do we become more flexible? It's not as easy as it sounds because we often get stuck in our own story, which prevents us becoming more flexible. Okay.
So if when we're being flexible, that is the better place to be, the more resourceful, more effective place to be, let me just ask you a question. Where do you think people are the most rigid in the way they interact with people? Where do you think that is? How would you label it? Don't be shy. Stubbornness, okay. Where do you think we need to be most flexible? What's that? At home? Yeah. I'd agree with that. I'm still practicing that one. I'm still working on that one. So in the way we interact, where do you think we need to be the most flexible?
With ourselves.
With ourselves, potentially. Okay. And how might we do that? Reflection. Okay. Self-awareness. So we've got to start with self-awareness. And what happens in a lot of the organisations that we go to work in, they talk about behaving differently. So you need to behave differently with this person. So they talk about the spectrum of flexibility in their behaviour, which sounds obvious, right? So if I'm behaving in a way that is very aggressive towards Lou or very passive on the counter, I just need to behave differently, and then we'll start to build that relationship. That's being flexible, right? And that can work. However, it's unlikely to be sustainable in terms of the way you interact. So if I'm working with you on a regular basis, just changing my behaviour, just working at that level, isn't likely to get that sustainable change that I can really build the relationship. Where I need to get flexible with first is in my thinking. You can click now. So if we look at our beliefs, they are part of our thinking system. Okay? And what we believe, so what we hold to be true, so our inner truth, what we believe to be true about ourselves, the world, the restructure, the organisation, our boss, the other people we're working with, what we hold to be true is a belief. It is just a story. So it's very rare that what we're thinking about a situation or a person or ourselves, it's not actually that rare that that can be true if it's what's stopping us get the results that we want. So what we believe to be true will absolutely influence what we expect from a transaction with another person or with a group of people. And what we expect will influence how we then behave. And how we behave will influence our results, and the results that we get will absolutely reinforce our beliefs. So it's great making some changes here at behaviour, and that might work in the moment, but if you want to get sustainable change and build connection in relationships, you have to go back a few steps and first examine what are the beliefs that I'm holding right now in the context of this situation, in the context of this person and this relationship. Make sense? So, building on Lou's example, so there's a key stakeholder that I can't influence. I believe that the relationship is difficult. I mean, there are a whole load of beliefs that will play out in that particular situation. It won't necessarily just be one. It can be really complex. And that's the story that we start to create about that particular situation. And then we play out the story because we've created this story about this difficult person that we can't influence, of course, we then expect to go into a meeting and not influence them. So guess what? It influences our behaviour. So we might come across as passive or aggressive or somewhere in between that hasn't worked before because we're expecting it not to work. And the results are, no surprise, it doesn't really work. And of course that reinforces the great story that we've made. So we're all just living out a story. So we've talked about self-awareness. Behavioural flexibility is critical, and you can be aware of, well, you speed up when you speak, or you come across, you use very aggressive language in a meeting, but actually you've got to come back 2 steps and really examine and be really honest with yourself. What is it that I am holding to be true right now about this situation?
So when you start to do that, when you start to challenge your beliefs, this is getting into some real self-awareness now. When you can do that, it means you are able to respond rather than react. It's very different. So stimulus response. We get stimulated by something and we respond. When we have a stimulus response with no gap in between, when we are not self-aware, and sometimes we can be very self-aware, but in the moment, because we're not in a great mood or something's happened to us, in that moment we cannot be self-aware. We can just go back into stress and react. When we don't put a gap in, what we do is we blame the stimulus. So some of you might experience traffic road rage, getting over the traffic. It happens to me a lot. So when I'm in this stimulus response no gap, I'll turn up, because I live in Southampton, so I usually got quite a drive when we're going any, you know, I'm quite south. So the first thing I'll say to Joe is usually bloody traffic, blaming a load of cars for my mood. Like I had no choice about my response. Stimulus response no gap. It's the traffic's fault I'm in a bad mood. When my 15-year-old son doesn't answer his phone, I fly into a fury, and I'm blaming Charlie for not answering his phone. That's the reason I'm in a bad mood. It's completely his fault. Like I have no choice around how to manage my response. I completely react. When I become more self-aware and notice why I might react in this way, so for example, for me, you know, being late, I have some beliefs around being late, which might mean the client, the customer, might think I'm incompetent and I'm not respecting them. That's what it's about for me, when I have no evidence of that, but that's why I get frustrated about the traffic. It's not really about the traffic. So when I start to become aware of what's really triggering me, I can start to put in a gap. It doesn't mean I don't respond and feel the same, but I notice at the time it's happening what's going on for me. So it's happening again, Lou, it's happening again. What is this about? Work it through. So I start to put a gap in. Or I can do some great hindsight thinking. So I might react, but afterwards have a conversation with Joe that might say, so what is that about for me? I did it again because I'm taking responsibility. Then when I'm truly self-aware, when I'm stimulated, I can choose my response based on the outcome that I want. When you get there, it's great. So if we take, again, the example of I can't influence my stakeholder, stimulus response, no gap. I'm running some beliefs, as Joe said, about they're a difficult person. Maybe I believe they don't value my role. So as soon as I see them, they're the stimulus, my reaction is, in my case, it would be defensiveness. In someone else's case, they might withdraw. But it feels visceral. You see them, and that's how you react. Once you start to recognize that they are triggering something in you, you can start to put in a gap. You'll still respond and feel the same way, but you'll notice it's happening, which ultimately then gives you the choice around how you respond. But you cannot do this until you raise your self-awareness. So choice is key. So where are we now? So relationship resilience is built on self-awareness. And as much as we like to blame other people for being difficult, it's not them, it's you. Perception is not really reality. And we bandy that around quite a lot. Well, perception is reality. Yes, and of course it is. But that is because it's our beliefs. Some of our beliefs we hold fundamentally to be factual. And when it's a fact, we can't change it. But actually, it will be a belief. So once we recognize it's our beliefs that are preventing us to connect and to have relationship resilience, it's not them, it's you. And when we recognize our triggers, when we are self-aware, we are much more able to respond, not react. It's not them, it's you. So self-awareness gives us choice. When we have choice about how you respond, we become more resilient. So when you make a choice, you change your future. Everything in your life is a reflection of a choice you have made. And as difficult as it is to admit sometimes, if you're not getting on with somebody, you have a contribution to that. If you've got a great relationship with somebody, you have a contribution to that. If you are not getting on with somebody, ask yourself, what is my contribution to this? Because you do have one. Every choice you have made, that will be reflected in the outer world. So if you don't get on with somebody, it will reflect some choices you've made about the way you interact. If you make a different choice, you'll get a different result.
So if we think about the bamboo and we start to get flexible with our thinking, then our behaviour, the choices we make about our behaviour are much more varied. So that's where we can become very flexible with our behaviour if we go back to our thinking. But before you do all of that, you need to think about what your outcome is. Because how will you know if your thinking is supporting your outcome or moving you towards your outcome, or whether it's actually getting in the way? So we work with a lot of organisations with sort of up-and-coming leadership teams, with top talent, and we also work with organisations where there is a problem. And 9 times out of 10, when we start to talk to the people about what it is that they want to do instead, They really struggle to articulate what they want, but they're great and can give you an amazing story about what is wrong, whether it's with their own capability, whether it's with their line manager, their team, whatever it might be. They can give you War and Peace. So we find it generally really easy to talk about what's wrong rather than what's right. So in terms of relationship resilience and getting better outcomes and working more effectively and working more flexibly, what we want you to do is just think about, all of you now just in your head, think about a situation that you might be experiencing right now or have done recently, and think about where your focus of attention is. Is it on what's wrong or is it what you want instead? Don't be taking water when you're supposed to be clicking my slides. So this is what happens when we focus on what's wrong. And it's almost like a different take on the self-fulfilling prophecy that we looked at earlier. When we're in problem focus, that engages an internal state. Okay? An internal state is driven by our thoughts, beliefs, values, all those sorts of things, emotions kick in, and it engages a level of emotion on a spectrum of anxiety from I care right up to I think I'm hyperventilating, I might be about to have a panic attack, or I think I need to kind of leave the room right now. So there's a whole spectrum in terms of anxiety, from mild to absolute extreme. That internal state, though, as we've seen earlier, will start to influence our behaviour. And when we're on this spectrum of anxiety, which is a more negative spectrum, the behaviour that we'll engage in is more likely to be reactive. It's more likely to be the stimulus response, no gap. And the interesting thing about this is that we convince ourselves very well and very effectively that it's reducing the size of the problem. And actually all it is doing is reducing our levels of anxiety. So the loop starts to come back inside. I did want to pointer, but I'll try and use my long arms. So we're focused on the problem, what's wrong, what we don't want. I can't influence my stakeholder. I can't influence my stakeholder. He's difficult. He's excluding me, etc., etc. I'm feeling pain from this. I feel anxious of a spectrum. I then react. Now, I might react in a way that is withdrawing. So I might just stop speaking to this particular stakeholder if it's a really hostile relationship. Or I might go the other way and adopt Lou's general response to that kind of stimulus and become more aggressive and push even harder, which creates more hostility. And then I start to focus even more on the problem and what's wrong. Okay?
Some people even leave the organisation.
Some people do even leave the organisation. So my reaction can be, extreme in very different ways, from withdrawal right to exit. And in that moment, though, what I'm doing is I convince myself that I'm reducing the size of the problem, because then I don't have to interact with them necessarily if I've withdrawn or I leave the organisation. But of course, guess what? I go to the next organisation, or I go and work on another project team, and there's someone just like them who is equally as difficult. Or there's 3 people that are even more difficult. So I haven't actually solved my own problem around building connections that are effective to influence others who have this type. All I've done is reduce my anxiety in the moment. And what this creates, if the vertical axis was results and the horizontal axis is time, what happens is I get this kind of yo-yo effect. So I get some results initially, and that's just self-preservation, because I feel my anxiety levels reduce in the moment. And of course, the next meeting, the next email that I send with this particular guy, or the next team I go and work with, it just comes back again. So I get moments of respite from it, but I don't actually solve the problem. And this can be really exhausting, really exhausting. So if we flip that to being really clear on our outcome, so I talk about what's wrong, I can't influence this stakeholder, and go, so what do I want instead? And I focus on my outcome. Well, actually, I'd like to be able to influence this stakeholder, and what will that be like for me? And I start to get real clarity on what are the success criteria for that. What will that look like for me? How will I know when I'm influencing them? How will I know when I've increased my level of connection with them? And that will then engage internal state, which is very different from anxiety, but still on a scale from I care about this relationship, I care about how I engage with this person, right up to complete fire in my belly. Actually, I can't wait to start and go through something different. And of course, if I feel passionate of a level, I am more likely to react in be more proactive in my behaviour. Now, if we put the chart up again, what happens then is you get a trajectory that goes upwards towards your outcome, but it doesn't mean that it will be free of obstacles. What it means is that if you are really clear on your outcome and how that will be when you get there, then you are more likely, when you face adversity or difficulties in those conversations, in those email responses, it gives you a choice point because you're really clear on what you want. And so you're not going to fall into that reactive behaviour, but you're going to take some time to self-reflect and then think about, okay, but this is where I want to go, so what can I do differently this time? So all this is showing you is a slightly different take on the self-fulfilling prophecy and really articulate how you can reframe a mindset that has got a problem orientation to a mindset that has an outcome orientation.
Shifting from a problem to an outcome sounds simple, but you need to be in the right state of mind. Some of you might have seen this model before. It's from transactional analysis. And there are 3 mindsets in the drama triangle that you can adopt. When I say you can adopt them, it doesn't feel like a choice when you're in the drama triangle because this is where you are reacting, not responding. The most powerful position in the drama triangle is victim. And the victim mindset is one of disempowerment, I'm unresourceful, I have no choice, always happens to me, poor me, poor me, poor me. It's a very one down position. And by the way, we will all spend some time in here because we're human. It's when we get stuck in here. So the victim mindset is one down position, I have no choice, I'm powerless. The persecutor and the rescuer are one-up positions. Now, you can stay in victim, some of you might, or you might bounce into one of the other two. My natural default, as you've probably gathered, is persecutor. And when I go there, I go to a place of blame. So it's not my fault, it's everybody else's. Completely outer world. Or you can bounce into rescuer, which is a place of avoidance and trying to be heroic. This is when I'm going to do things for people and help. But when I'm rescuing and doing that, actually what I'm doing is avoiding what is really going on for me and helping someone else to make myself feel better. So when I'm in a victim mindset, what I'm likely to do with a stakeholder I can't influence is feel like there's no point, I've tried everything, they just won't listen. I'm likely to withdraw. From a victim mindset, I'm likely to move away, as Joe said, and not spend any time with them, avoid meetings, do anything I can, and ultimately I might leave the organisation. If I bounce into persecution, I'm likely to become very defensive, very aggressive, be even more pushy. Again, not helpful. And if I go into rescuer mindset, my actions are more likely to be doing things for them to please them, to try and win them over by doing things for them. So I'll be picking up work that's not really mine. So I'll be convincing myself I'm helping them, but what I'm really doing is avoiding having to influence them. Make sense? The antidote to this, if I choose to take it, is the empowerment dynamic. So basically, you're taking the drama triangle and you are flipping it up. The antidote to the victim mindset is the creator mindset. So this goes from there's no point, I've tried everything, I have no choices, to, what if I did have a choice? What if there was a point? What if I hadn't tried everything? And in that mindset, I'm much more likely to go and give it another go and try something new, rather than withdraw. The challenger is the antidote to the persecution mindset. And the challenger is all about asking yourself, what can I learn from this? I ask myself this a lot. What can I learn from this? Rather than blaming, what is this situation teaching me about me? And what can I learn from it? By asking myself that, I'm going to put a gap in rather than go out there and become even more aggressive and forceful. And the coach is the antidote to the rescuing mindset. So rather than going and doing the work for them and avoiding influencing, what I would do instead, from a coach mindset, is go and have a conversation. So what needs to happen so that our relationship can improve? What needs to change so that you would be prepared to engage in this piece of work with me? For example, you'd be asking coaching questions rather than doing it for them. But you have to be self-aware. You must know, before you can change the way you're thinking, you must know where you are to start with. So just starting to notice when you're in the drama triangle is really powerful. That's a great way to start to raise self-awareness. Notice when you are feeling sorry for yourself and withdrawing. Notice when you are blaming the outer world and not going within and becoming defensive. And notice when you start doing something for somebody else because you are avoiding the real issue, and do something different instead.
So, to summarise all of that, which is taking a bit of a journey that's a bit like that, we all need connection, okay? And when we don't have it, through rejection, through loss, through exclusion, it hurts and the pain is real. Relationship resilience equals less stress. So if we start to become more resilient in our relationships and start to face into some of those difficulties with a slightly different mindset, then we work our resilience muscle and that will decrease our levels of stress in the workplace. It's not them, it's you. I think you heard that as a relatively powerful message around, there is stuff going on here and I have a contribution to it. And starting here is one of the most powerful places to start. Perception is not really reality. Well, of course, perception is our reality, but it's not the whole reality. And by challenging our beliefs and thinking about our mindset, we can start to challenge the reality. Then we can start to do something different. Practice responding, not reacting. Think about the stimulus response model. How often do you respond in certain situations? What are your patterns? What are your normal triggers? Okay, and when you start to notice those patterns, then you can start to explore why that is and think about how you can do something different. And then finally, focus on the outcome, not the problem. Start to notice when you are talking about everything that is wrong, and then ask yourself some of those powerful questions that allow you to flip into how you would like it instead. So the message around it's not them, it's you, I guess, that will apply to all of you in this room, but it also applies to all of those people back in the workplace, that actually we have to start taking some responsibility. And sometimes looking in that mirror can be pretty ugly. So we hope we've provoked some thought for you today. And we'd just like to leave you with one final thought, which is the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Thank you very much.
We've got time for some questions, and I think they were right. I think you were brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
So, questions? But you've scared them all.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
sorry, the second one today. I agree. Can't disagree. I just do it a lot myself. But what you see, what you hear, the information you take in, the information you give out, is confused today, potentially because of social media, email communication, lack of substance in the message, somebody just trying to get over a message real quick, not getting to the point, and it's damaging. And those recipients sometimes just look at it and go, what's that all about? Now, when that message comes in, where's the opportunity for self-reflection? Because, that can piss you off. And it can be continuous.
Yeah.
Because that's the way the sender, the giver of the information, that's the way he is.
Yeah.
So
how do you deal with that? So if someone responds to something and you think, well, I've really reflected on this in the past and I feel like it's clear, and they're still saying, well, hold on a minute, this isn't clear to me. Is it that kind of...
No, it's not necessarily one particular message. I'm just saying that social media today has such an influence on the way that people react. And recipients, on certain occasions, they don't leave the organisation. They commit suicide. It's that bad. So how does this all work with social media?
And I think social media, is a great example of how it just shows how important connection is to us, because people are connecting through social media rather than the kind of whites of the eye stuff. And I think, whilst you can take responsibility for yourself and you can take moments of reflection to think about, how do we as an organisation message something in a different way or in a more effective way, you can't take responsibility, to use your example, for someone that commits suicide, because it is very likely that there is a whole complexity of other stuff going on for that person. And I think you can only take responsibility for your communication and your part in it. You can't take responsibility for how the other person receives it. You can just be mindful through patterns of responses how you might adapt to do that more effectively. I don't know, would you add anything to that, Lou?
Yeah, and I think the social media, absolutely, you've lost that connection, which is so important to all of us. And it's so simple, but having team meetings, people don't do that anymore, really. You know, getting people who work remotely in the same room because of budget, and it's just a false economy because people feel disconnected. Presenteeism is huge right now with a lot of the organisations we're working in, and simple things like how can we make sure we get that face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball time. I mean, literally, if you just did more of that, that would have an impact because people feel isolated.
I mean, just on the social media point and the example you gave, you know, if you look at a lot of stats, they say that anxiety levels in general have increased through things like Facebook. And it's because our perception of reality is completely distorted. You know, I had a friend the other day say, oh, yeah, no, I saw so-and-so's post on Facebook. She looks like she has such an exciting life. And I was like, but most people look like they have an exciting life because they only put on there, check in here, check in there, look where I am, I'm at a great party, you know. And so if all you're seeing is that snapshot, then you're bound to think that they're having an exciting life. And then, of course, you get the ranters who then just want to post anything, you know, and draw in the, you know, so this has happened today, and they just want everyone to collude with the story because they're blaming the outer world. So I think, you know, it does distort it, but because we are aware that that is happening in the world now, I think in terms of the workplace, all you can do, like Lou said, is, as well as the meetings, is really take time to be present in any interactions that you have with the staff, because that connection is critical in helping them see, okay, so what are you believing to be true about this situation? You know, so my friend, it's like, well, I think you've distorted the reality of her life because you're seeing one part of it. It is not the whole truth.
And also we do, you think about one-to-ones, even on the phone, we get into straight away into task. Just asking someone how they are they getting what they need right now in terms of support, it doesn't happen. When we work with our clients, that is the first thing we do. You know, especially if you have a brand new team or there's been a change, how are you all feeling about this and what do you all need right now to help you manage it? Those conversations don't happen. So that connection of feeling cared about has been completely lost. You know, and my son, who's nearly 15, how many Instagram followers has he got? That is an indication of how popular he is. And we laugh about it, but actually it's really bloody scary. Because that has now come, the social pain is, I haven't had enough likes on my picture or my post.
No one's commented on my holiday photos, you know.
So social pain is much more prevalent now because of it. So we completely agree. But it's that, bring people together and show them that you care. And as soppy as that might sound, it's really important.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, Mark Adams from King's College. From a manager's perspective, I understand just about everything you're saying, but it does seem to me that a lot of this is almost we should be investing in EI training for the staff, because a lot of that is, yeah, okay, we think we're giving the message, and maybe we are, but are they getting the message?
Yep. And I think investing in some learning around that is helpful, but for us, the most important thing is role modelling it. So if you are a leader and you're not role modelling self-awareness, you're not role modelling how are you doing, are you getting what you need, if you're not role modelling giving feedback and receiving feedback, I mean, we do so much work around feedback, and people are afraid to go and give it. And we've had stories, people go and give it to someone more senior, and they get a really negative response. When actually, as a leader in your organisation, if anyone gives you feedback, even if they deliver it in a way that's not particularly helpful, be grateful for it. And then just give them some feedback on the way they gave their feedback. Rather than be defensive, just to say, look, I really appreciate the fact that you have shared this with me. I want to talk to you about the impact that had on me. It felt quite tough, and let me tell you, some of the language you used felt quite hard, and maybe we can talk about that, but I really appreciate the fact you had the balls to tell me to my face. because it doesn't happen very often. So I think absolutely training and learning would be great, but we know what budget constraints are like. So if you can role model it, if you can role model how you want your organisation or your team to be performing and behaving and being, that is really powerful. And tell them that you're doing it. Tell them that you're doing it, rather than doing it secretly, because then people look for it.
I think we listened to one of the talks this morning. I can't remember his name, sorry.
Oh no,
No, the one before around, and the speaker then said, you know, ideally when he works with organisations, if you can get your senior people to buy into it, as your sponsor, you have much better results with the work that he was doing, and it's exactly the same with this. So, you know, yes, you can do learning lower down the organisation, that can be helpful, but if you invest right at the top and role model it, then it does start, you know, 80% of organisational learning actually happens unconsciously, which is quite scary when you think about the amount of money that people do spend on learning. And it happens unconsciously because people start to mimic what they're experiencing.
I mean, the number of times at home, I will shout at my children and my husband from another room, stop shouting from another room. I'm just not role modelling it. And I wonder why it keeps happening. So it's that kind of thing, metaphorically speaking, that happens in the workplace all the time. We want our people to be a certain way. We want them to be emotionally intelligent, yet we have got no self-awareness at all.
Dominic Kelly, Melia via Workplace Solutions. I'm just interested if any of the companies that you work with use EI as part of their recruitment or promotion processes.
I would say they do. But whether they do in reality, I would challenge. It's a really hard thing to measure. It's a really hard thing to measure.
The reason I ask is I've just seen some awful examples in the boardroom in recent years where there are people sat around the table in senior decision-making positions that just can't even cope with other people sat around that table who might have a different view to them and expressing that view. And you can actually see them totally disengage from a board meeting when that happens. And for me, that seems to be less a case of a need for training and more a case of probably promoting inappropriate skill sets.
Yeah. And that does happen, doesn't it? You know, you get people promoted on technical ability. So, you know, the classic, so I come from a pharmaceutical background where the top rep then got promoted to be a sales manager. It's a completely different set of skills, completely different. And then they wondered why they had all these people issues because they were going out for the kill for the sale and were just getting frustrated watching their people and had no idea how to really connect and coach and empower and grow their people. So I think that, I mean, it kind of blows my mind really that it still happens that people generally are promoted on technical capability. But I think, you know, the piece sat around the boardroom, you know, I think another thing to consider is the power of, when I say peer pressure, so Lou's mentioned feedback, peer feedback, because actually as a team, as a leadership team, have they contracted to, you know, what are the behaviours that are acceptable and not acceptable, and are we then holding each other to account for that? Because, you know, people then just get away with stuff and then the other people in the team will then say, well, the leader should. But actually it's everyone's responsibility in that team to say, actually, this isn't okay. You're completely disengaged, or I'm noticing that. Can we have a conversation about it? And people still, in our experience, lack the courage to have those conversations. You know, and Lou alluded to our conversations earlier, which get very heated. And it's only through those conversations of challenging, holding to account to say, oh, hold on, we've crossed a boundary here and we need to have a conversation. And that needs to happen in leadership teams, in all teams, in fact.
And in our experience, when feedback is given, the impact is only positive. And there's one story we have about one of our oldest clients we've had since we started the business, who the chief exec was always on his iPad and was never engaging fully in meetings, and he came to view a presentation that our delegates did at the end of a program, and he was on his iPad. So at the end of the session, I said, I'm just going to go and, before we debrief, I'm going to go and speak to him about it. the look of horror on people's faces in the room. You can't give him feedback. You'll never work here again. I mean, literally, fear. So I gave him the feedback, and I said, well, you know, I'm wondering if you're aware of the impact this has had on the delegates today that you're on your iPad. And he said, well, I'm a busy man. I was told I had to come, and I said, well, next time, with absolute respect, I'd rather you didn't come. Cut a long story short, the impact that had on him was phenomenal in a massively positive way. At conference that year, he then stood up at conference and said, you know, I've been given some feedback about the impact it has on my iPad. That is never my intention, and I please want all of you to feel able to talk to me if you ever think I'm not being present. So how often do people share feedback with people? Because sometimes people just don't know what they don't know.
But, sorry, just on that. So, to some extent, I believe political correctness has gone too far, and people have a fear of breaching political correctness. Now, I believe there's a way to say anything appropriately without offending anyone. But I think some people are just nervous because they've seen or read about other experiences and they go, whoa, I'm not going to go there or talk that way because someone's going to take real offence. I mean, how do you respond to that sort of issue?
Well, most of the time, it is purely belief. Because when someone says, you know, they said, you'll never work here again. I mean, actually, the reverse was true. They wanted to work with us more. But when I said, so when was the last time someone was sacked for giving someone some feedback? Well, I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but you know that kind of, it becomes a myth, an organisational myth, and then it just perpetuates. So what we do is we challenge people's beliefs around, so what evidence do you really have that that is the case? And we don't have any, it's our fear that stops us.
It also goes back to managing yourself. So if I was to give you some feedback and then notice that it was inappropriate or your response wasn't what I was expecting, what tends to happen is we then go into anxiety and we kind of shut down and then think, uh-oh, and kind of, you know, withdraw or then over-justify, rather than say, you look like that I wasn't expecting you to write that, or inquire and become curious about what, and stay in a really okay place to have that conversation, because, you know, we're all going to make mistakes, right? But it's about emotional intelligence, self-awareness to go, how do I re-regulate? How do I get back on track with this? Because, you know, we went to a conference last night called Permission to Fail, funnily enough, and you know, that they were talking about, but if you're not failing, so if you're not making some of those mistakes, then you're not stretching yourself and your capabilities. So it's okay to get things not quite right, as long as you have got the courage, I think, to help yourself get back on track. And that's all you can take responsibility for, is yourself.
I think we need to...
Yes, move on.
There's obviously probably more questions bubbling. Hopefully you can grab Joe and Lou in the break, but we'll make the loudmouth Aussie the last question.
There's some feedback.
Yes?